want me to come down there? Okay. Okay.
I have one more. And another award for $1,000 went to Evan Kiefer. His major is communication and design. His essay was on inspiration of his parents who always encouraged their family to volunteer and gain appreciation of what others may not have versus themselves. The past 3 summers, Evan's gone to Cumberland Mountain in Tennessee for an outreach program to help families in need. He also is heavily involved in Jerome Methodist Church, student leadership, technology team, student mentor, Bible school, and sports activities. Evan?
Thank you very much, Debbie, for all that you guys do. And the Dublin Citizens Police Academy is really a fantastic organization here in our community. We're very proud to have it. So thank you again. Moving on to the Grizel Middle School girls lacrosse team, I will turn it over to Ms. Aludo to address them.
I'll have
I'll make them come up here, absolutely.
The coaches are going to come up too.
The coaches and the girls, come on up.
The coaches are over on the side.
Ha!
Yes.
The entire chambers just stood up.
All right, thanks.
Wow.
Thanks. Back up.
Look, it's like I'm
Back up.
like Pigpen with dust.
Back
They don't
up.
want to back up too close to me.
So I have to tell you, one of the coaches has a super famous dad. This is my daughter right here. All right, so there's a lot of names in this thing, so I hope I get all your names right. Actually, I feel bad. I feel like Mike should be doing this, but he declined. So whereas the Grizel Middle School girls lacrosse team completed their 2018 regular season with a record of 3 wins, 5 losses, and 1 tie, and after winning the Shamrock Invitational, the team ended their season with a winning record of 7 wins, 5 losses, and 1 tie. And whereas Dale Hounshell serves as the athletic director at Grizel Middle School, and the girls lacrosse team is ably coached by Julie Hemmerich, Kelly Ross, that's you, with support from volunteer parents including Nina Lee, Alina Mehta, this is the one I'm going to get wrong, the Leklinskis. How bad did I butcher that? Klinsky? All those letters are, wow. All right, I really did butcher that one. The Burns and the Fligners, all whose dedication and commitment has supported this successful team. And whereas the young and talented team includes captains Amanda Fligner, Ida Moden, and Jameson Byrne, and members Olivia Arbona, Ella Barney, Caden Brennan, Elizabeth Brogan, Emily Catrabone, Ava DeMasi, Megan Duffy, Sarah Johnson, my next door neighbor, Sonia Mehta, Ryan Scotch, Carolyn Smith, Anna Solis, Samantha Stutz, Madeline Virant, Gabriella Weber, Emily Weibel, Margaret Whalen, Paige Wiklinski, Camila Cycle, and Camilla Kafizov. All right then. And whereas playing in the position of goalie for the team were Gabriella Weber and Camilla Kafizov, and the top 3 scorers for the Shamrock Invitational included Ida Moden, Camille Cycle, and Jameson Byrne. And whereas the hard work and individual efforts of each of the team members results in their successful season. Now, therefore, he, Gregory S. Peterson, Mayor of the City of Dublin, Ohio, do hereby commend the team for their achievements and proclaim Friday, June 15th, 2018 as Grizel Middle School Girls Lacrosse Team Day in the City of Dublin, extending our congratulations to the team and their coaches on a successful season. Oh, they like that. So I'm going to present this to the coaches.
Hey, Johnson. Johnson. Good to see you, kid. Congratulations.
It's a lot of noise. Make sure it clear they know they can leave. It's a big deal. All the life just got sucked out of the room. We're just left with us. Oh, well. I guess we'll carry on. Citizen comments. I don't have anybody that had signed in. Is there anyone that is here that would like to comment on anything that their heart desires? They can talk about it for 5 minutes. Seeing no hands, we will move along. The consent agenda, there's only one item on the agenda, so I guess I make a motion that we approve the meeting minutes from the May 21st regular council meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Ann?
Yes. Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Bosa?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
First reading is ordinance 39-18, Ann?
Rezoning approximately 47.37 acres on the east side of Highland Quarry Road, approximately 1,200 feet south of the intersection with Tullymore Drive from PUD Planned Unit Development District, this is Autumn Rose Woods, to PUD Planned Unit Development District, for an amendment to the approved development text to permit the split rail fence to remain along the perimeter of Reserve C to be owned by the City of Dublin. Need an introduction?
I'll introduce it. Claudia?
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Now that all the life has sucked out of the room, I am happy to be here. This ordinance started in March of 2018. If you remember, Councilmember DeRosa had met with adjacent residents to Autumn Rose, mainly within the Bishop's Crossing, Bishop's Run neighborhood. And we had originally, when this rezoning happened in 2017, actually, as part of our taking over open space maintenance, decided that the fence that was surrounding this open space, a large wooded area, would be removed. And I have a map here real quickly. There in the northeast area of this site, there are a large set of woods that are being retained as part of this development, and there is a existing split area fence that is surrounding that area. And again, originally based on maintenance costs, maintenance concerns, we had put into development text that that would be removed, and there were adjacent residents that were concerned about what that would mean to their environment, to their backyards. And with the help of Mr. Rosa, we and you all have guided staff to provide this application before you tonight, which has gone to the Planning and Zoning Commission in May. And with that, we are ultimately proposing as part of this before you tonight that the area outlined there in orange would be able to retain the split rail fence as it exists today. Parks maintenance staff, parks operations have been out there, have been inspecting the fence, have also done some repairs at this point in time. And so we have done an updated development text to allow fencing to be within this reserve area, as well as provided some language that would outline what the expectation would be for this in the future. As I said, the Planning Commission approved the text as it is before you tonight. They've also approved the final development plan. So with that, we would have a second reading on June the 25th, and then we would be good to go from here on out.
Thank you, Clay. Any questions from council? We pretty much flushed this all out, I think, at the last hearing. Okay, we'll see you back on June 25th for that.
Thank you.
Ordinance 40-18, Ann.
Authorizing the city manager to execute and accept necessary conveyance documents to acquire a 0.027 acre fee simple warranty deed for right-of-way without limitation of existing access rights, 0.581 acre permanent utility grading easement, and a 0.055 acre temporary easement from the Board of Education of the Dublin City School District for the property located along Highland Croy Road for the public purpose of constructing a new roadway which shall be open to the public without charge.
Dana?
Need an introduction.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Introduce it.
Good evening, members of council. The city intends to construct the Highland Croy Road Riviera Connector, which is part of the 2018 to 22 capital improvements program. The project requires the acquisition of property interests from 8 property owners. One of these is the Dublin City School District. The city has participated in good faith discussions with the Board of Education of Dublin City Schools, and the property is located as provided in a map in your packet on the north side of Brand Road, north of Brand and east of Highland Croy Road at 8300 Highland Croy Road, Dublin. The parties have come to mutually agreeable terms for the purchase of the right-of-way and easements necessary for this at a cost of $21,000. I want to thank the Board of Education. They have previously passed this at a recent meeting from their end, and staff recommends adoption of this ordinance at its second reading public hearing.
Any questions from council? All right, thanks, Dan. We'll see you back here on June 25th.
I'm sorry, I did have one question. Did we look at this area for any landmark trees? I know we're going to get into that tree line. Did anyone take a look at that?
I think that's a requirement when we're winding the right-of-way, but I don't know what the outcome of that was.
Well,
we can check
don't need
it
to know
out
it tonight,
and follow up.
but before second reading, if you could just please
Yep.
let me know what the tree impact is.
We can do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? See you back on June 25th on that. Ordinance 41-18, Ann?
Adopting amendments to Chapter 99 of the City of Dublin Codified Ordinances addressing small cell facilities and wireless support structures within the right-of-way, including design guidelines for specifications and aesthetic requirements that all small cell facilities and wireless support structures must meet prior to installation in the City of Dublin right-of-way.
I'll introduce it.
Thank you, Christina. Jen?
Good evening. Vince and I are going to partner on this one. In December 2016, the Ohio legislature enacted a law that would limit what municipalities can do to regulate telecommunications facilities in the right-of-way. In response, approximately 90 cities, including the City of Dublin, filed 5 separate lawsuits across the state. The law was overturned in June 2017 before it officially went into effect. The municipalities, with significant leadership from the City of Dublin, reached a compromise with members of the telecommunications industry regarding how to regulate wireless facilities within rights-of-way. That compromise is reflected in House Bill 478. The bill will go into effect on August 1st, so Ordinance 41-18 must be adopted and effective by that date in order to put Dublin's regulations into place. The new language will ultimately provide more predictability and speed to build for telecommunications facilities while allowing us to protect the character of our community. As a result of the compromise with the industry, small cell facilities and wireless support structures are permitted uses within the right-of-way and are not subject to zoning approval. It's important to note that House Bill 478 only addresses small cell facilities and wireless support structures in the right-of-way. This does not in any way affect our ability to regulate the large macro towers or facilities outside of the public right-of-way. A cross-departmental team has been working on the proposed code and design guidelines, including planning, engineering, law director's office, with assistance from Ice Miller and Land Plan Studios, and they're with us tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Vince, and then we'll all be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you,
Vince.
Jennifer. Mayor, members of council. What I'd like to do is walk through an overview of the proposal, a summary, and happy to answer any questions. And additional staff and consultants are here. Oh, thank you. Additional staff and consultants are here to answer questions as well if you want to dive into some of the details. In terms of some of the goals, what we tried to accomplish in this project within a very short time frame was to meet the requirements of House Bill 478, provide an administrative process that works within the city's current right-of-way process. Again, these are limited to the public right-of-way. And then to ensure that any future installations that may occur in the city are consistent with our planning, engineering, and aesthetic priorities through clear and consistent design guidelines. So that's really an overriding aspect of this entire project. Again, in terms of the Ohio Revised Code, House Bill 478 did amend a previous Senate bill, which was adopted in 2017. It requires municipalities to permit small cell towers within the right-of-way, typically located on either existing public and private infrastructure, as well as the installation of new poles within the right-of-way. It does give us the ability to regulate the placement and appearance of these towers and the associated equipment. It prescribes timeframes in which we need to review and approve requests that are submitted to the city that are consistent with our code and our guidelines. It prohibits all municipalities from preventing the installation of small cell towers in the right-of-way within individual political boundaries. It also requires that our local processes and requirements not be subject to or part of the zoning ordinance, which is why this sits in a different part of the code from an ordinance standpoint. So in terms of our approach, we are amending Chapter 99, Wireless Communications, by adding a new sections to address the administrative code under general right-of-way permits and a special right-of-way permit specific to small cell facilities. Separately, we are, as you know, as we've proposed, drafted separate design guidelines, which are an administrative tool to guide the design and placement of towers and the associated equipment, again, administered by Public Works with support by planning, particularly for the new installations. Just to give a little bit of background in terms of what is a small cell tower and the related equipment, because this is different than what we typically think of in terms of wireless communications, which is typically the large, tall, 90-foot or taller macro tower. These are typically, per this legislation, limited to 40 feet in height. They will have some associated equipment, electronics, which either attach to the pole or sit in a separate utility cabinet adjacent or near close to the pole. To give you an example, this is a recent installation in the city of Hilliard in Old Hilliard. Shows you what is a kind of quote-unquote typical installation of a small cell tower, which is to the left, and then to the right is the associated cabinet. And in this case, this is placed within a median with landscaping. And from what we understand from the industry, to date in Ohio, there are a couple hundred of these installations around the state. As of yet, obviously none in Dublin specifically. In terms of what co-location is, since that's a big piece of this, what that means is a small cell tower can be attached to a streetlight pole, a city streetlight pole, a city traffic signal pole, as well as private utility poles. Typically within our city, those are the AP electric poles, wood poles that are in historic Dublin is one example. There are a couple others around town, but actually not very many. So more than likely, in our case, this will be on one of our existing poles and or a freestanding pole. And we have guidelines that speak to those when they make sense, when they don't. So in terms of our administrative process, again, administered by Public Works, there are 4 permit request types. The first type is the co-location on an existing structure, which again could be a city structure or a private utility structure, a pole. The second one is the freestanding pole, which would be owned by the carrier, again placed in a right-of-way. The third permit type would be to remove one of those installations once they've been permitted and installed, so we can manage that removal, particularly when it applies to our equipment. And then fourth is a category under Ohio Revised Code that speaks to eligible facilities requests, which tend to be modification of existing wireless installations. ORC is very specific in terms of our ability to process these permits. and there are different windows between 60 and 120 days specific to each permit type. The state law also allows a carrier to submit to us a package of multiple locations that we can then process as a single application, which makes that a bit more complicated, but could help on the staff side in terms of facilitating the review. And again, because this is frankly outside the zoning code, in any municipality, there is no public review process permitted by state law. So it isn't eligible to include that. In terms of the design guidelines, again, administered by Public Works with support of planning. The guidelines speak to general design guidelines, context-specific, which speak to different parts of the city, and then our standard drawings and specifications in the rear of the document. In terms of co-location, generally speaking, we do encourage that, except where context-specific guidelines speak to that more directly. That's to minimize the amount of visual clutter within the right-of-way. In doing that, co-location, you cannot increase the height of any existing structure by more than 5 feet. That's state law. Existing privately owned utility poles, again, are eligible depending on whether or not the carrier can work with the owner to make that work for a specific pole. And attachment to any city pole must not compromise the structural integrity of that pole. And that requires city engineer approval. In the previous legislation that was adopted by the state in 2017, that requirement is one example that did not exist, so which is why the new law is more beneficial to municipalities by giving us more authority in this arena. This is an example that we had prepared for us by Dan Philibom that shows an example of where you would co-locate on one of our existing light poles, street light poles. And you can tell to the right, the antenna is obviously the small piece at the top of that. What this doesn't show, but in a sense, the utility box could be to the rear and hidden in landscaping that supports that pole. In terms of guidelines, new wireless support structures, you can notice all the references to Ohio Revised Code is very specific in terms of maximum height of 40 feet. That can be reduced to 35 feet in residential districts. There's spacing requirements as well. We do have latitude when a proposal comes in the door if we need to suggest moving it 100 feet to deal with visibility triangle, street trees, other things like that. We have that ability to influence that location. We have setback requirements that we have placed in the guidelines ourselves. And then there are numerous pole specifications that deal with the diameter, how the foundation is engineered and constructed, color, et cetera. This gives you another example of a new freestanding support structure. This is on Riverside Drive in Bridge Park, and obviously the new tower is to the right. This does a good example of showing a tower with the antenna at the top, and all the hardware and electronics are placed in the base, meeting our design spec in terms of that being kind of a small space. I'll show you another example where it's more blocky and visible. This helps to streamline the installation so it isn't as visual. Doesn't create as much clutter in the right-of-way. It's more streamlined. In terms of our general guidelines, in terms of antennas, ORC derives some of this in terms of the actual size of that and the shield, the shroud that has to shield the antenna within it. We have specifications in terms of the diameter of that structure so that it isn't too large, but it has to be mounted at the top of a pole, has to be cylindrical in shape, and the color has to match the pole. Again, trying to reduce visual clutter. This is two examples. One on the left gives you an example of where co-location meets our guidelines. The one on the right, which is not unusual at all around the country, shows an example that does not meet our guidelines. And we've done that in several locations to try to demonstrate what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Again, the illustration on the left is trying to streamline the equipment. Again, and then in terms of the associated equipment, the additional box, utility cabinet that supports the tower, ORC limits it to 28 cubic feet, which is actually quite large. Yeah. We've heard from some of the carriers that their equipment may be smaller than that, which is good, because that's a fairly large object. But we have to permit that if someone were to propose that because it's in state law. Can be ground mounted, can be mounted on the pole itself, or it can be mounted within the base. And we define the size of that, again, to streamline that. All of that secondary equipment has to be concealed within an enclosure and a cabinet. We are recommending, our guidelines recommend landscaping when it is ground mounted to help screen that. Color has to match the associated pole, and all the wiring has to be undergrounded. Those are our guidelines again. This gives you an example of what a typical kind of ground-mounted cabinet looks like. Again, in our case, the color will match the pole, and again, where we can, it'll be landscaped so it's somewhat hidden. If you think of the cabinets that are out there today associated with a traffic signal, this is not any different in some respects. These can be a bit larger because of the state law, but it's that type of equipment that you'd see in the right-of-way. This shows you an example that does not meet our guidelines of a pole-mounted cabinet where a lot of things are visible. The way the guidelines are written, that cabinet on the right is actually enclosed within a shroud that makes it a more solid object so it is not as visually apparent, which helps it again, and color to match the metal pole. These are two examples, one from Denver on the left that meets our guidelines in terms of design, one on the right from San Jose that does not meet our guidelines. And you could obviously tell on the right, it's a lot more, the components are more blocky, it draws more attention because of that. The one on the left is far more streamlined and almost kind of disappears in a sense into the backdrop, which is what our intent is. Now, in terms of the context-specific design guidelines, we've added specificity for historic Dublin, Bridge Street, West Innovation District, all other commercial areas, and then residential districts. So these provide guidance. Again, we cannot prohibit these poles under state law, but we're trying to explain what the city's preferences are. So in terms of historic Dublin and location, in yellow, we're recommending as preferred side streets, lanes, and alleys so that the towers are not on Bridge and High or at the intersection of Bridge and High. And really part of the intent there is also to get them mounted on the existing utility poles that are out there today, the wooden poles. Long term, that may change if those get buried, and we can deal with that at that time, but at least it helps to protect the aesthetic character of those two corridors within historic Dublin. Because of the unique nature, and again, we're preferred as co-location on AEP poles. New poles are strongly discouraged. And co-location on our existing pedestrian-scaled streetlights is not permitted because their design and the way they're fabricated cannot support those poles. So that helps to protect the integrity of those poles and helps with the corridor from an aesthetic standpoint. This is an example of a co-location on a pole here in Dublin that we showed as a rendering with the additional antenna at the top of the wooden pole and the pole-mounted associated equipment there as well. We found throughout the United States this is a very common way in which these have been installed because many cities in the United States, particularly older cities, have a predominance of wooden electrical poles. And so it's not unusual at all to see that sort of an installation. Also in terms of historic Dublin, if there is a new pole, it has to align with any existing poles in the same right-of-way. So again, we're minimizing visual clutter. It has to be a black powder-coated finish, approved by city engineer. We're not supporting the placement of ground-mounted equipment cabinets in our tree lawn or the pedestrian furnishing zone on High and Bridge Street because, again, that creates visual clutter, and we are going to require additional landscaping in case there is ground-mounted cabinets someplace within the district. In terms of Bridge Street District, the guidelines suggest that the preferred corridors for placing these is corridor connector and district connector streets, which are on the street network map. Local streets within all of Bridge Street, they're discouraged. And with new streets as a preference in place of new wireless structures, since those haven't been built yet and they can be planned within those streets. Co-location on existing post-top streetlights are not supported, which is the existing streetlights that are out there today, because they, again, from an engineering and fabrication standpoint, can't support antennas. Color must be black powder coated finish, and ground-mounted cabinets within the pedestrian zone and furnishing zone are not supported because we've spent a lot of money and are maintaining really nice planted areas, and we don't want those to be interfered with visually by having these cabinets placed in them. So it really then speaks to this sort of a tower where all that equipment is in the base, and you've got a very streamlined structure that's a new pole in the Bridge Street district. is a preference. Again, reducing visual clutter. In terms of West Innovation District, the guidelines speak to focusing on arterial and collector streets, that new poles are preferred, again, because it's a developing area. In this case, we're discouraging ground-mounted equipment in certain areas, such as the future Main Street or Town Center that's on the OU campus or within the plan that was recently adopted. The color preference there is bronze, which matches other poles in the city, and ground-mounted equipment landscaped. Similar standards for the other commercial districts in the city, focusing on arterial and collector streets. In this example, and in this case, principally talking about co-location because we already have infrastructure in place, again, trying to minimize visual clutter, bronze in color, and landscaping when ground-mounted equipment is associated, replacement in existing planting beds. In our residential districts, the guidelines prefer arterial and collector streets as a preference, except in areas where residences front onto those streets. Local streets are strongly discouraged. Co-location is preferred on existing poles, and new freestanding poles are strongly discouraged. One thing that's very helpful for us is the fact that in the majority of our neighborhoods don't have underground electricity running through the streets, and these need power, obviously, and fiber. So it really helps us in that regard, and in some conversations with at least one carrier, they suggested that their approach would be to be on the perimeter of a neighborhood, on an adjacent arterial, so they're not in the neighborhood. So they can project into it to provide service, but they don't intrude. So that's really very helpful from that standpoint, again, in terms of visual clutter. And we do have an example, just in case something were to happen within a neighborhood, that a pole be placed adjacent to a side property line, so it's not in front of a home, but between two homes. And that's a very common kind of standard you see around the country as well. So again, you're not impacting the front of a residential property. Color has to be bronze, again, landscaping when there's ground-mounted equipment. So at this point, staff does recommend adoption of this ordinance at the second reading, public hearing, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and we have, again, other folks here to answer.
Questions from council?
Questions?
Vince?
I have several.
Whoa.
Oh, you got
Go ahead. Hey, Vince.
Yes.
On your repetition of the boxes have to be landscaped, I would suggest that say with evergreen plant materials. I don't know if it just said landscaped.
I don't think it's that specific, but we can make it that specific.
I would make that
would be year-round.
specific because summer and winter, deciduous plants, you're going to see the box through the branches. Another question, is there any municipalities that have looked at this as a profit center, as attaching them onto their posts rather than having them pay the money to
Unfortunately,
erect them?
not, because the Ohio Revised Code is very specific in terms of the fee that we can charge, which is $250 per installation. That's the only fee we can charge on an annual basis.
Wow.
$250.
They must have a really strong lobby.
It is better than the previous legislation, I think, which no fee.
They do, don't they?
That was Greg and I were in the room. That was the negotiated price based off national average and the like, and that's actually to the high side compared to some of the states that we were comparing to.
Yeah, because these past towers have been great revenue sources for a whole lot of people. You know, it's too bad. Okay, thank you.
Couple questions. Is there any limit to the quantity that we can welcome into our community?
No, ORC does not allow us to place a cap on these.
And some of these poles that you had towers to the top of, or antenna to the top of, can they also put something else on the side of it? So let's say if there's an area of the community that doesn't have a lot of options, would we be forced to allow multiple entities, be it Verizon, Sprint, AT&T, all strap something onto the same pole? Somebody takes the antenna on top and somebody else does one on the side and somebody else does one lower on the side?
We've written our guidelines to state that the antenna can only be on the top of the pole as a way to limit that from happening, because we wouldn't want them on the side kind of clustering necessarily. We've also been told by at least one carrier that they tend not to co-locate because there are conflicts between antennas when they do that, so they do want to separate them out. But what it might mean is that on a given street, you could have 4 of these within a given block, kind of scattered along, which we can't necessarily prohibit. We have some distancing requirements that give us some latitude in that regard, but not an absolute No, when it's proposed.
Okay, and technology is changing so rapidly that they believe this is what they want today. Do we have any removal requirements for no longer in use?
We do. The guidelines are written that if they are no longer in use, they have to be removed within a certain time period. I think, as we've discussed, it's sort of hard to document when that might be because we can't monitor them to understand that. But we're assuming that the carriers will choose to do that because they should take the equipment down or remove the pole, given the cost that's involved with it.
You would probably notice that when they remove the electrical service, I would imagine, because that would be the most expensive part of the whole thing, I would imagine.
It could be, absolutely.
Do we have any way of monitoring that? Or can we collect information from them on their, I think this may be a shorter term solution than what perhaps is anticipated. And I want to make sure that we have the ability in short order to remove them when they're no longer in use. So I don't know if we could require a number for their power source for this or what, or how, you know, I'd like us to think of a way that we can figure out when they're not using it anymore and make sure that they have to provide the information so that we can verify if they're using it.
Absolutely.
Before we answer that, though, I want to introduce Greg Dunn. I don't know that our newer council members have met Greg before. Greg is special legal counsel to the city, has been for 30 years, I think. And Greg has handled telecommunications work, cable TV work for the city, and actually I refer to him as the co-founder of Dublin as well. So, Greg, do you want to mention anything? The law says that if it is not used, it's to be taken down. The issue, obviously, and the burden, as you point out, Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms, is us monitoring that to make sure that that's taken down if it's not in use. But the state law does cover that.
Yeah, we're allowed to do that. The difficulty, as you're pointing out, is how do you figure out when they're not using it? But we are allowed to, make them remove it. That was the negotiated point in the revised code.
Well, let's think that through, and let's figure out a way to know when they're not using it anymore, whatever that trigger might be. Because I have a feeling, even on a lot of our wooden poles throughout the city, there's a lot of stuff on them that is no longer in use.
That's something that, and you're spot on with that one, because something that I know Greg and I have talked about for years is let's take utility lines. We actually used to have a consultant to work with us. He retired. We need to find a replacement. To Paul Blazer was his name, that could walk a pole line and tell you what was being used and what wasn't being used. And you'd be surprised how much cable is laying around on poles that's not being used. And getting that stuff cleaned up is yeah. So we'll need to find that expertise, but we need to figure that out.
Let's figure that out before and put it on our application so that we can collect that data on the front end and we don't have to try to figure it out later. The utility boxes, do we have some level of maintenance expectations on the utility boxes? Because this city is littered with utility boxes that are in disrepair. And I know that you all experience in terms of code enforcement and so on and so forth. So I'd like to tighten that up in this and say that there'll be an annual inspection of your utility boxes and you might receive notice and you have 14 days to bring them up into compliance or whatever it is that you feel like is reasonable. Let's get it in there for that. So we don't have to look. If there are going to be this many more utility boxes, we can't afford that many more ugly utility boxes. Do we know anything about the radiation restrictions on this and in terms of densities?
The FCC has radiation restrictions, and they have preempted the field for anybody else to regulate the radiation.
Do they have some specifications? So he's talking about maybe if you had 4 poles in one spot, you might have AT&T on one, you might have Verizon on another, you might have T-Mobile and so on and so forth. Is there a restriction for how many can be in that proximity to meet that radiation threshold?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question.
Because the more you get, the more radiation you're going to have.
We can, though, point out they have to follow FCC rules on radiation. Okay. But we're not allowed to proactively regulate that or regulate it differently.
I would just like us to make sure that whatever their requirement is, and they have to submit how much radiation is on theirs so that we can total it up in a given space so we're not
Well,
have a hot zone?
let us check the legality of
Okay.
that,
Yeah,
because
right.
as Greg is pointing out, the FCC level, there's a whole other level of regulation on these things at the federal level, which preempts any and all of this. So we're just hopeful they don't preempt all of this at the federal level.
That's an individual. What about collectively, though, is her point? If we have 4, 6, 8
The
together.
sum of the total,
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good question.
Is there an FCC requirement for that?
just the individual. So if
Okay,
we could look
gotcha.
into that, that would be great. My next question is, we're talking about burying utilities in the historic district. What happens if someone puts their utility on this pole and we take it down? What is our,
It is then removed, and they would have to reapply to probably install a freestanding pole.
so we're not on the hook for their relocated?
We may be responsible for part of the cost coverage.
I guess you're suggesting if we take it down, we probably wouldn't just take it down, but if it was part of a road widening or something like that, there are relocation costs associated with that. And if I recall, Greg, wasn't that on the burden of the company to relocate?
I think it was. I'm trying to remember the law, but I believe that's in the law. But I'm pretty sure we're allowed to do that if we make them move it for a public safety or otherwise. If we make them move it for our convenience for some reason,
The cost burden falls back on us,
If we had any
which is generally how right-of-way is handled now with utility companies. In fact, there's a effort at the PUCO for the utility companies to avoid, that's our next fight, to avoid that cost, so.
Well, I think I just would be curious to know, because we do like to bury utilities whenever possible, and if there's any opportunity to avoid added expense by putting it on the front end back on them, that, you're only leasing this pole as long as it's there. If it's not there, your lease is up, sort of thing. Would like to make sure that gets in there. And then one just kind of critical thinking. If we determine the color to be bronze or black powder coating, I'm wondering if maybe the language there might be better to say that your color will be determined at the time of your application, depending on where it is. Because, we may see things out in the West Innovation District. Instead of bronze, maybe we have a lot of things that go black over the black powder coat, and we've already indicated that these need to be bronze. I think we don't want to nail down that color, but that we would notify them of the powder-coated color finish that will be required at the time of application.
The guidelines can be modified administratively at any time by the city. So we gave ourselves a lot of flexibility in that. So if they want to go from black to bronze, they don't have to bring it back to council or do anything. They just make it bronze. So we can do that.
But you'd have to modify it for, maybe this block versus that block. Maybe if the first block was bronze and the second block was black or whatever. Just a thought. I'm thinking we may not want to tell them the color now. We may want to tell them the color when they come, because we'll have a greater idea of what's going to be in proximity.
And certainly West Innovation could evolve as it starts to develop out. So we're trying to keep it district specific. So you're spot on in terms of whether we want to change that and go white or some other color, based on what fits the architecture, et cetera.
Maybe we would get some larger user out there that wanted to have some of their utility in the color that is associated with them, be it emerald green or, a hunter green or whatever that might be. I just think it would give you more latitude. You wouldn't have to change your code if you say we're going to tell you what color it has to be when you apply, rather than determine that color today. And those are all my thoughts. Thank you.
I've got one question. You said we can't control the number of poles, towers, uses. Is that correct?
We can't control the total number.
The total number.
Yeah.
But is there a mechanism for need?
No.
Why wouldn't, so they could put 50 of them up and we'd have no say, even though they don't need 50?
That would be true.
That doesn't sound like a good plan.
Yeah, but that would be, that'd be kind of a foolish economic decision for them. I don't think, but there is no, we tried to get, at least there was discussion of, prove you need it, give us an engineering study, but we were unable to get that in the bill. Now, on the other hand, I really, haven't done this for a while. I do not think they're all having trouble with capital right now, because this is a huge investment nationwide. So I just think it's very unlikely that they will put more facilities in than they actually need at this time. I just don't see that happening.
So related to that, how many do we think we're going to have here in Dublin? Do we have any guess?
Yeah.
I would share that in a meeting with one of the carriers, they suggested south of 161 on either side of 270 that we might see 8 or 10. As one of the major carriers. Now, so we were sort of fearful that we could be overwhelmed, but based on at least initial conversations, it's going to be more a case of being underwhelmed, actually.
It's not going to start fast, I don't think, but we don't know where this is all going technology-wise. So, you know, if they figure out a way to get enough bandwidth into homes, they may end up putting a lot more of them up, you know, because they'll replace the wireline carriers. But nobody knows if that's how this is going to go down. So right now, just for the next few years, we're only going to see the numbers mentioned.
And aesthetics aside, we may have better cell service. Right? That's the idea at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Greg, would you mind speaking a little bit to the speculative builders that were out there? A lot of times in the macro world, you'll have people that actually are more like real estate brokers for macro towers, and therefore we consider them speculative. That was one of the key issues that we took up with this, because do you want parties that are not officially representing or acting on behalf of these companies putting these things up?
Yeah, I think that gets to the Vice Mayor's point. But yeah, we fought very hard that only companies with FCC licenses to provide cellular service could build these things in the right of way, for fear that companies would come in and build them and speculate that they'll lease them later. But we got that in. That was a major fight, and that brought a lot of people to the State House from the tower industry who were in that business to try and stop us, but we succeeded on that one. So only somebody who's actually providing service, or has the capability, I should say, of providing service, can build the towers.
Any other questions from council?
I have a couple. This is about the review. I know that ART is going to be the reviewing body for most of these, except in, I understood it was just, ART was and ARB gets it in the historic district? Is that correct?
The reviewing, this is purely at the staff level through Public Works.
Okay.
Planning will provide assistance on new installations, but there's no ART review, no ARB or Planning Commission review. At the staff level.
I could have sworn so.
Yeah, that's Ohio Revised Code forces it to be at an administrative level.
So there was a mention in here about ARB in the historic district. What was that referring to?
That they didn't have a bite at the apple.
They did not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And even for conditional use?
There was no conditional use.
There's no conditional use for it, so I must have been looking stuff.
Yeah, it's really an administrative permit.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you was about, it was the area in the historic district, Eberly, Penny, and Spring, between Riverview and Blacksmith Lane. Those areas are primarily, some of those have some frontage, some front door space on those. Is it possible, since you prefer them on the yellow streets, the small, that could be, those three possibly looked at as to be removed and make those a discouraged, because they really are all residential there?
I think our strategy there was to get them placed on, if we were going to get any in the historic district, that they be placed on existing electric poles throughout their day. And I guess we were careful not to limit our options too much, because we want to encourage that versus trying to argue placement right there on Bridge or High, or even at the intersection, which at least one carrier talked about mounting on one of our traffic signals there. Mm-hmm. And engineering has concerns about co-locating on a traffic signal, given the electrical potential, some conflicts there from an electrical standpoint, given the design of a specific pole. So, I mean, we can look at that, but we're trying to provide some flexibility in order to encourage them to be placed there, so again, the visual impact is minimized.
Right.
I will say that, at least in one of our conversations, there was concern by one carrier that, given the slope, at least on the east side of South High, that was not very appealable because of the movement of buildings and the topo, that it would hurt the signal. It wouldn't be as effective. So they're going to look for high points when they're going to place these, which could speak to like the bridge over the Santa River, by example, and a light pole there could be far more effective in terms of the historic district or a larger geography than trying to bury one in the middle of the historic district. But because we can't say no, we were trying to say, let's do it here under certain circumstances. That seemed to be the least intrusive way to do that in the historic district itself.
Well, I like the idea that it's in the alleys, and I have no problem with Eli, Penny, and Eberly. It's just when you get to Blacksmith and down farther towards the river, you are then dead in the middle of the residential. You have left the so-called alleys and service area, and you can speak to that. And then, so I would want to at least look at those one block areas.
And we'll think that through, absolutely.
Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you is, there seems to be no opportunity for these poles to be put on top of trees or artificial trees or anything like that. There's no way we can camouflage these any better. Poles is all we get, right?
I mean, they're in the right-of-way, and so they have to be installed on one of our street trees or look like a fake street tree, and that's probably counterproductive to what we want to accomplish.
Okay.
Particularly a fake street tree would be pretty apparent to a pedestrian along any of our sidewalks. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only thing I would add about your question of when you get into these tough, and we learned this in deploying a 24 square mile Wi-Fi system previously when the city had done that, sometimes topography, there's a trade-off between being in a real prime high location and maybe locating in an alley, pick any city in any city, Ohio, where there's trade-offs between maybe having more of these in certain places where they're less obtrusive, or impactful, as a trade-off to having them in a real prominent place. So putting them in a back alley, even though the topo isn't great, they can penetrate those businesses from the back side and probably present more service to the residential at the same time. So there's really interesting trade-offs when you really drill down, and having the ability that we negotiated for in tolling in terms of the turnaround times was critical, because that enabled us to have a little bit of negotiating latitude in trying to work with the industry proactively in citing these things. Now, I guess one thing I want to make sure everyone understands is that we went from zero, when Senate Bill 331 was introduced and passed, we went from they got to put anything, anywhere, anytime, anyhow, in any format they wanted to put it in. That was our starting point. And then I would say that we didn't get everything we wanted for sure out of this bill, but we went, I would say, pretty far in pushing back and getting some of this, and that was really the result of the 90-plus city coalition that stood behind it, and the Ohio Municipal League jumped in on that too. So anyway, it's not perfect by any stretch, but it's a lot better than where we started from.
Yeah.
Well, I think, excuse me. I was just going to say, I think these guidelines are fabulous. I mean, if we have to have something like this, which we do, and technology is, to be able to be forward-thinking and being this unobtrusive, and even in the historic district, because obviously, and I've read about this in many historic districts, they've had some horrible things in the middle of the most beautiful scenic areas in the country. So kudos to the work you've done here. It's really good.
Thank you. If I could just say one thing, I'd like to commend the city of Dublin. Dublin was the leader in this process. Dublin organized the pretty much the plaintiffs. Dana McDaniel did a fantastic job, because we had 50 plaintiffs in our lawsuit, and then there were 90 statewide. So herding that group and getting an organization out of it really took a lot of skill, and Dana and Dublin are to be commended for it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg. Any other questions from council?
I just had one. We keep using the word guidelines, guidelines, guidelines. So does that mean we really have enforceability on this, even though the word is guidelines on here? So
we just picked a word. Guideline. The guidelines are enforceable.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, we'll see you back on the 25th on that one as well. Ordinance 42-18, Ann.
Adopting amendments to Section 153.162 of the City of Dublin codified ordinances to require registration of sign contractors and bonding for sign installations.
I'll introduce it.
Thank you, Christina. It says Vince, but I see Claudia still standing there.
No.
What's going on?
She was just helping me with the technical.
Oh, okay. Vince.
Mayor and council, thank you. So what we have for you tonight for first reading is an amendment to the sign code, which is one of two. We've started some new slides, particularly for the Planning Commission ARB, that speaks to our process in different ways as some ongoing education, particularly for our newer members. But this is an amendment to the zoning code. And as a bit of background, really back in 2017, we started experiencing challenges with sign installations by tenants and some property owners who were not getting permits. And that kind of started in some retail centers, spread to some of our mixed-use developments, and then to some freestanding commercial sites. It appeared to be a bit of a pattern for whatever reason. It was causing headaches for us, and we weren't getting, obviously, proper permit, but also in some cases, signs installed that didn't meet code or meet an adopted master sign plan. So in 2018, we notified the relevant property owners of what the regulations were, what our enforcement procedures were, and that we were enhancing those enforcement actions at that time, moving a little bit quicker in terms of procedure. At the same time, we engaged sign contractors, some of our professional organizations, and looked at some local municipalities to get an idea about how they deal with these sorts of issues, and really what their administrative requirements were. What we discovered was that in many cases, sign contractors are specifically required to register with the city, required to pay and have an annual bond in place in case there are issues with an installation, and to require insurance. The only thing we were requiring as a city was registration with our building standards department. And so the proposal before you really puts the onus on sign contractors that they need to meet code and that they need to convey that to their clients, because that's part of the problem in some cases. It's a client telling a contractor, go ahead and install my sign, don't worry about the city of Dublin. And that's caused problems for us. And so the proposal is to update, clarify our expectations, and what the code amendment states is to install a sign, you have to be a registered sign contractor. You have to register with the planning division, which are transferring from building standards with their support. And that occurs on an annual basis. But you have to have commercial liability insurance in the amount of $300,000 for damages to a single person, $500,000 for one occurrence. It's a very common level that we've discovered. That you have to also post an annual bond with us, also a very common practice. And that we can revoke your registration or deny its renewal if you have ongoing violations, you've installed without a sign permit, or you have, outstanding zoning violations. And that the application itself has an acknowledgement section that states that the owner, the tenant, or the contractor is aware of the code requirements with the sign permit application. We circulated this with all of the applicants over the last 3 years to get their feedback, and met with the Central Ohio Sign Association's leadership. I met with them, some of our staff, and we have their support. Actually, I think they're a bit embarrassed by some of their bad players. So this was taken to the Planning Commission. This does meet our criteria for code amendment, and Planning Commission did recommend approval, as do we, at the second reading. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions from council?
I'd weigh in on that a little bit. Don't we already have a requirement that contractors post a bond? Why would these guys be treated differently?
That's a good question. We don't. Building Standards does that.
I think it falls within the same framework, and they're required to have proof of insurance and also to post a city bond. I mean, we do them for all the municipalities, require that for any contractor doing work in each and every one. Some of them have to have 20, 30 bonds for every municipality around the state.
Sure, absolutely. And we're obviously moving this into planning so we can enforce this through the zoning code, which right now it sits in building, and they're really detached from the zoning code in that respect. So it gives us more authority to hit the applicants up front or the contractors when we're having an issue by pulling that bond if we need to, when a sign has been installed.
Well, I understand the reason. Maybe you could use the existing contractor's bond requirement and just expand the use to.
We possibly could. We'll definitely look at that.
The other thing is you have a limit, 300, 500. That's a really odd limit. That's each person, each accident. Normally you see either a single limit or something less than. I think some of the smaller operators are probably going to be at a 300 single or what have you. Plus, I don't see any PD limit. That just looks to be just BI.
Mayor, members of council, Councilman Keenan. Just to speak to that limit, it was taken from the Columbus analogous sign ordinance where they license their sign contractors, and so that's where that limit was taken from, with the thought that if somebody is complying with the Columbus limit, as most any contractor in this area would be trying to do, that that would be a level appropriate for the city of Dublin to sort of piggyback onto as well. If you would like us to see if we can find comparable suburban limits or readdress that between now and the next
So
reading.
you're only interested in bodily injury and not property damage, the way that's worded is what I'm saying. It says 300 each person. What did I see here? Just looked at it. Yeah, it's a prior slide. Yeah, amount of 300 for damages.
Single person.
To a single and 500 for one occurrence. Sure looks like it's just for a person.
And the code language may be more specific.
I think we
It's
just
the
need to
summary,
work on
but-
the insurance language,
Right.
because that's
It's
not.
a general commercial liability
check.
policy that's mentioned in the code language.
Yeah.
So, but we can look at those coverage limits, make sure it includes
Yeah,
property
it's just the
damage as
nuance,
well.
because we deal with it
Sure.
when it's not written properly, and you might not be able to do that without stepping up to, more expense for the contractor. So just a nuance.
We'll check on that.
Kathy, did you have something? Jane, someone down here was.
I got one question. How much is the bond? They post an annual bond. What is the annual bond amount?
We were looking at $10,000 is very common, and the price for them is $250 a year, I believe.
Right, and the way that the code language is written is that is something that would be set by the planning director. Those numbers come from your conversation with the Central Ohio Sign Contractors Association.
And we contacted about a half dozen suburbs in particular, and it typically was 10,000, sometimes 25,000. So we wanted to do a little bit more research before we decide what's the most appropriate.
What's the contractor bond rate? Isn't it 5 or 10? For the normal home improvement or whatever to do business? I think
I don't know.
that's no more than 10, and I thought it was 5, but it's usually 100 to 250 bucks a year. So
Very inexpensive.
Do you have the ability to wrap the bond in with the fee? Sometimes that can be a far more affordable way for contractors to get a bond, especially for the smaller sign shop kind of folks. If their fee is, if you need a $250 fee from each person, and you might make the fee $300, which will buy them, $60,000 worth of bond.
We could look at that. Our goal was to do a single bond once a year, not a bond per permit. So that way the impact
Well, I mean,
is much
and
less.
they only buy their chunk of that. So you buy the single bond per year, and then they buy their chunk. So if you have 100 permits on a $100,000 bond, everybody has their $100 they've purchased of that portion of the bond. It can be done either way.
I think our intent was that the contractor had to file that bond each year when they register. So they're paying for the bond, $10,000 bond.
That's
Now,
probably the most laborious part of the permit then.
Could be.
would
But
be
then we could
securing the
pull
bond.
it, when they have.
yeah, if they're doing a lot of work, it's cost effective. If they're doing one job a year, then they're upset.
And the majority are doing a lot of work. We only have a few outliers who might be from out of state who only show up once a year, if that.
And I will say to the Vice Mayor's question about that, in the initial draft that was circulated to the sign contractors, we had proposed a bond associated with each permit application, and their response to that was that an annual bond was more in keeping with what others were doing, and as we explored that was their suggestion and what I believe Vince ultimately will go with.
I did think of it. I know that when we talked about this at planning and zoning, there was concern about the fact that we didn't want to make it more expensive for a small business owner to be able to get their signs up, because it's expensive as it is. So obviously, I like the idea that however we can keep this cost down, we should. Secondly, the enforcement part, now in the zoning code, it's $100 a day if you break the rules. But apparently legally that is difficult to enforce because it costs so much to take someone to court. So not knowing how this bond works, if we have a problem, is it also difficult to enforce? Is it also expensive to enforce? So I'm just curious about that.
You'd have recourse against the bond,
Right.
company. That's the whole purpose of issuing the bond.
Right,
that
so
you
it's
can go back
pretty
and
simple.
damages.
They break the rule, you pull the bond.
Now, the question would be, does it include fines and penalties? I'm not sure about that. That might be a different animal.
So it's a lot simpler to enforce this than it is to take someone. Okay, thanks.
Right, and if we pull their license, they'll never be back, at least for a year, however that might play out,
And
which
the
would
issue-
affect some local folks.
The issue with enforcing the zoning code through the mayor's court citation process is not so much the cost of that enforcement in terms of dollars for the city, but the cost of time, the procedural protections that go into all of that, the $100 per day. You have to prove each element of those offenses. So being able to draw on a bond to address those violations and to address recouping abatement costs is intended to be a much more streamlined process, but does not exclude the ability to go to mayor's court or to go to the environmental court if we have that type of circumstance where it's appropriate.
Any other questions from council? Hearing none. Vince, we'll see you back on June 25th.
Thank you.
Ordinance 43-18, Ann.
An ordinance adopting the proposed tax budget for fiscal year 2019.
I'll introduce it.
Thank you, Christina. Angel, you're not standing up, and your name's the one that's written here, but you can go with it.
As mentioned in the memo, the tax budget is required to be filed with Delaware and Franklin counties each year, and this is for the 2019 tax budget. This is the sole purpose for us completing the tax budget. We do a very preliminary analysis for these numbers within the finance department, and obviously, as we approach the end of the year, we'll have a more detailed operating budget analysis. But I am happy to answer any questions on the tax budget.
Thanks, David. Any questions from council?
Procedurally, do you have to amend that from time to time if your estimates are off, or is this just one and?
Just an estimate from the time we submit it.
Any other questions from council? Okay, we'll see you back on that on June 25th as well. Resolutions, Resolution 28-18.
A resolution in support of complete streets principles.
Thank you, Christina. Megan?
Good evening, members of council. As outlined in the staff report in your packet this evening, the City of Dublin has been recognized as a bronze-level bicycle-friendly city by the League of American Bicyclists since 2013. Staff is once again preparing to submit an application for the bicycle-friendly city in early August with the goal of achieving silver level status. While Dublin City Council and staff have long embraced complete streets principles and been recognized as a leader in the area, the goal to accommodate all modes of transportation to meet the needs of all citizens. Passing a formal complete streets resolution provides an opportunity for Dublin to achieve a higher score through the upcoming application process. And a formal resolution adopted by council will also help us increase our ratings with MORPC's Regional Sustainability 2050 initiative, as well as other grant opportunities that are out there. With that, staff recommends council approval of resolution number 28-18, expressing support of complete streets principles.
Thanks, Megan. Any questions from council?
No, it's a great idea. Thank you.
Hearing none. Ann?
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Under the other portion of our agenda, master sign plan, Columbus Metropolitan Library, Dublin branch, and downtown Dublin parking garage. Jenny.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. This is a master sign plan for the Columbus Metropolitan Library and the garage. I think everyone's familiar with the site on High Street. This is a comprehensive sign plan that includes signs for the library as well as the parking garage and then some construction fencing. In terms of process, the master sign plan requires review by ART, which they have done and provided a recommendation, which I'll review, and then final approval of this is before you tonight. Following that, then they would proceed to getting permits through the building permit process. In terms of the proposal, as I said, there's three components. The first is related to proposed permanent signs for the library. So the library is proposing on their site, this is oriented a little bit differently with north facing to the right. So the library is here in this lower portion, obviously fronting on High Street with Rock Crest on the right-hand side and then North Street on the left-hand side. So they're proposing to install a ground sign along High Street in this landscape area, as well as then including 2 window signs at the 2 main entrances to the library. So in terms of the permanent ground sign, this just gives an indication of the proposed building, or excuse me, not the proposed building, the building under construction, and where the proposed sign will be located. So you can see the sign is pretty small scale with a maximum height of 6.5 feet, 16 square feet overall. This gives a little bit more detail of what that sign looks like. There's some grade change within that area, so wanting to make sure that fits in scale with the surrounding context. In terms of then the window signs, as I indicated, those are both located at, or one at each of the entrances. They're a little bit less than 2 square feet, so pretty minimal, white background with gray text, so it's just located on the entry doors. It just has the library location, hours, address. So those are the main components of the library signs. In terms of the parking garage, there is a variety of signs, again, because we're trying to look at the wayfinding aspects of this, dealing with pedestrians, bicyclists, vehicles as well, making sure that we're providing enough signs and wayfinding for them to navigate the site inside and outside of the garage. And the garage obviously is visible on 3 rights of way. So as I'll go through each of these individually, but the 3 street-facing sides all include a projecting sign and a canopy sign, as well as then there's graphics at the 3 stairwells and then some internal graphics at this North Street entrance. So in terms of the permanent signs for the garage, this is the North Street entrance. So as you're going past the library on the right-hand side, then is this entrance, which includes a canopy sign with orange lettering, which then at nighttime illuminates white. And then in the upper left of that then is a larger parking garage sign, which is 150 square feet based on the scale of this building, which then the park and the Circle P, those letters are illuminated at nighttime as well. In addition, ART recommended that, as you can see, when you enter the garage on this North Street entrance, there is a large wall interior to the garage that has some opportunity for graphics. So ART recommended that be included as part of the master sign plan that would allow for some graphics for the library interior to the garage, but you can see that from the right-of-way. Then moving to the Franklin Street side, similar condition with the canopy sign. In this instance, there's then the Circle P next to this public parking entrance with then a smaller scale projecting sign, largely due to the change in grade and the decreased elevation overall. So you're not getting the full 3 stories with the upper deck as you would be on the North Street side. And then on the Rockcrest side, this is where our bicycle parking is and the bike hub. So we have then canopy sign for the bike parking instead of a Circle P. Then there's a bicycle graphic, as well as then instead of the parking garage sign, then a bicycle that's located on the stairwell. All of those internally illuminated as well. The other component to this, as I mentioned, was the graphics in the stairwell, which then the colors of these numbers correspond with then the internal wayfinding of the garage. ART, as part of their review, had some concerns about the overall scale of these letters and the visual aesthetic of this and recommended that those be reduced. I didn't have that in time for your packet, but I do have what that would look like at a smaller scale if you'd like to see that later on. So those are located at each of the stairwells, and they're actually on the inside and the outside of that stairwell, so you internally and externally can then see where you are in the garage. And then last but not least is the proposed construction fencing. The applicant is proposing to include construction graphics. 96 square feet is the area of each of these proposed signs showing the library, and then depending on the graphic, temporary location information, as well as then partnership information and contractors as well. So one is proposed at the North Street side, and then another one on the High Street the High Street elevation. So with that, as I mentioned, ART reviewed this and recommended approval with the reduced height in the stairway numbers to 6 feet in height, and then adding this internal wall graphic at the North Street entrance as an additional sign type. So I'm available to answer any questions as well as the applicants.
Question on the blade signs, 160 square feet of blade sign.
That's only on this, the North Street.
Yeah, it takes up a huge portion of the library's whole facade. Is there any way that, was there any discussion on reducing that to make it less dominant, I guess you might say, for the entire building? That is a big sign.
ART did not recommend that, but we could obviously discuss that at council's pleasure to reduce the height of that.
I mean, you've got sort of a cool, modern graphic P parking sign on the one thing, and then you got this thing, it looks like a big commercial sign. On 160 feet of it's a lot of sign. You just think 3/8 or 24, and you start multiplying. I'd say it's 3 foot by 8 feet. That's a pretty big sign, but not, you know, and that's only 24 feet. But when you start saying it's 160 feet of sign, I think it's a little obtrusive.
Okay.
And, you know, just something to, I don't know how the rest of the council feels about it, but it looks like a commercial parking garage downtown. We're trying to do it for cash.
I think everything about it looks obtrusive. We spent an extra how many millions of dollars to face this in beautiful terracotta that we were going to be covering up with billboards that say what the building is, and clearly it's a parking garage. It's not wrapped in anything. You know, some of our buildings that are wrapped in other uses, it is more difficult to know that it's a parking garage. This one is entirely relevant, a parking garage. I'm not supportive of the numbers being visible from the sidewalk at all. No one walking by the parking garage needs to know that level 3 is green. That is not germane to any pedestrian scale anything. So I think we really have to look at this. This is supposed to be a pedestrian scale. It's supposed to have that flavor and feel. We spent a tremendous amount of money on facing this facility with the most beautiful materials that we could acquire, and I don't think it's appropriate to cover it up with signs.
I got to tell you, I tend to agree. These numbers, and when I saw this slide that was put up with these color numbers, I thought, how did I miss that? But and I understand that it wasn't in our packets. That just looked really cheap to me. The different colors and all that. There has to be a more subtle, appropriate way to remind people what floor that they park.
Every other parking garage does it, and you don't see it from, you know, across the street.
You only really
around
need
the
to
corner.
see it from when you get out of your car.
Well, I'm not
So
sure
you know
what
where to go
having
back
it
to.
on the outside of the building does for someone who's trying to find their floor on the inside,
Yeah.
too. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not a huge fan of the multicolored, even at the 6 foot, even there, you're going to be able to see it. It's not
agree.
attractive, and it doesn't seem to fit in with really whatever else we're doing. It just stands out like a sore thumb, and I don't know why we need so many signs that say parking, PP. Pretty much the only sign I liked in this whole thing was the little bicycle blade sign. I thought that was pretty cool and creative. Like, none of this looks cool and creative to me. It just looks very,
Well, for instance, on that
copycat it.
sign, it says park, and then on the bottom of park, it says P.
Okay, so.
One of those two would be
So
sufficient.
should we just then eliminate, I think I hear that loud and clear. Just need a little bit of, you know, maybe four of you to say, get rid of the numbers. We can get rid of the numbers on the outside. We'll focus those on the inside. When it comes to the parking sign, do you want to just take that to a P only? Are you okay with that?
Right, we could
That's
do a
appropriate.
That's
similar.
okay.
we
It's
could
the
do
one
same
hanging on the side of the building. So you
Yep.
want us to,
I think you need a blade sign when you're looking up, trying to find parking, you're driving around. But I just don't think you need one of that scale, something just a little more subtle and,
Or even just like the P that is on that blade sign,
But
rather than
turned out-
park with the P on the bottom of it.
so you can see it, or just a smaller
so you can
verbiage.
see it
People know
from the
P means
side.
parking at this
Yes,
point.
that's the international symbol for parking, yeah.
Okay.
Also, this is in the historic district, and there are regulations there. 8 square foot on a blade sign is what's allowed. So to go, and the height is, well, maximum height is 15, but 8 square foot is what the blade sign, so the P is sufficient. I don't mind the public parking on the wall sign. It's low, it's at pedestrian. I mean, if we're not going to be creative with the P we could be more creative, but since everybody identifies with that. But please remember, this is in the historic district, and we do have context here to worry about. So I don't think we should try to mimic or mirror what's in Columbus downtown or even on the other side of the river. I think we have to be sensitive here.
And just one other comment. I know that you said they added this suggestion. I don't even know what page I'm on here. Every place else where it says Columbus Metropolitan Library, it references Dublin branch. But then when you did, what page am I on? The interior one, it just says Columbus Metropolitan Library. Could we add Dublin branch? The sign outside says Dublin branch in that little green band. And I think it says somewhere else. I just think when it's referenced like that, it should be consistent. Any other, I'll try to summarize this, Dana, here in a second for you. Any other issues people want to put? Go ahead.
So we're talking, we'll go back to the library for a second. I went out just for reference today, and I see Allison is here tonight. So that is the sign, the standard sign at all the different branches, right? When I looked, it seems like, and I thought we were special and had the green, but come to find out everybody else has the green too, right? So you were thinking of us, yeah. So the base of that, is that a stone? One of my questions is, I like the sign, I get the sign, that's the brand. Is there a way at the base of this or whatever to give it that stone feel? Is that what we're seeing here? Is there a way to make it feel
like it matches the building?
Yeah, like it matches the building with total respect to the brand, but is there a way to make us extra special?
The stone matches. The stone on the base matches the stone on the building.
Yeah, okay. And wondering, just a question, is there any other way to make that even have a little more personality around that base? I don't know if I'm being very articulate here.
You mean have it come further up the sign?
I am wondering, just something, because we talk about this transition between, the stone and what we're trying to do in the modern. I don't know that because I'm not a designer, but I'm thinking something that brings that up a little really does echo that a little bit without, again, getting in the way of the brand that I know is important. Just, that's a question. So maybe that's an exploration, not a, because it may not look good, but I'm wondering if that would not be I'm getting a nod from my fellow.
Worth looking at.
Yeah, okay.
Any other issues to put out there? So we've got the numbers we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the what do you call them? Blade signs, that thing here in just a second, to make sure we have consensus. John?
Kudos on the fencing signs. I think it's a great idea. Let people know what's happening there.
Oh, on the construction fences.
Yes,
I agree with it.
very good.
Cool. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so.
I have one more thing.
Go
I just
ahead.
want to ask. Since there's some open options for working the sign, I don't mind the fact that the Columbus Metropolitan Library has a standard logo. If this sign were to come through planning and zoning, they would be looking at it based on the Bridge Street District sign guidelines, which would be looking for something creative, a little unusual, something that would match the character and the context in the historic district. So I would ask that as you take a look at the ground mounting piece, that you also take a look at ways to make this a little bit more distinctive and iconic that matches the building instead of just simply having a sign that matches all your other signs. This is what I think the Bridge Street sign guidelines are asking.
Maybe with materials or how
With
the letters are
materials,
mounted onto the
exactly.
sign.
And there's
or-
plenty of examples in the master design sign, Bridge Street guidelines. I don't know. Jenny, maybe you could talk to that from ART as to whether or not those kinds of things, because this is an identical sign to all the other signs in the city.
Well, that's a great point. So what was originally proposed with the initial submission was a sign that looked almost identical to the existing sign. So very small in scale, not representing at all what I would think is the corporate branding of the library. So ART's suggestion was to come forward with something a little more vertical, and again, representing a little bit more of what their brand looks like. So this is revised from their original submission, which was a very small scale, sort of traditional ground sign.
What are the materials on the sign?
These are metal cabinets with then.
Is there any relief? Are these pin-mounted letters, or are they laser cut into the metal, or is it a vinyl over top of the case? Because maybe we could look at, perhaps
little more relief.
Short, some texture
Some more
to it. Maybe a
dimensionality.
pin-mounted letter or something along those lines. Because it's going to interact with the public. It's not really a drive-by sign, it's a walk-by sign. And it'd be nice to have a
Romar's going to call me on the way home.
little relief feel to it.
So Dana, how would you suggest we still try to pass something tonight with this direction, or see if you can come up with something and bring it back?
I think Jenny was frantically trying to capture this, right? So if you can give her a second, why don't we try to let her capture that, and then we can put it up? And if we can get the guidance, I think, we might need concurrence from the library if they're willing to do that. On a couple of those items, like the base or the sign lettering. I don't know, Allison, if you need to take that back or.
We need people to come up.
Right.
We can look at that. I need Jenny's help because I'm not sure I really understand what's being asked of us. Certainly the base, that's easy. The other piece, I'm not sure I completely understand. So we'll have to go back.
Do there at the library before you're ready to open, so we might have some time.
We got plenty of time. That's not, I was trying to capture the direction. Let's make sure we understand the direction before we go marching out of here.
Yeah, so we'll try to summarize that, taking those one issue at a time.
Well, and part of it too is, you're looking at one of the applicants right here, right? where
Right,
we're at.
right.
So we know what we can agree to.
Right.
The issue is whether, the library
And I
can or
might
not.
say,
So
in the garage, thanks for being our branding king, for making us say, be consistent. So that's an easy thing to do. And the base as well, I think that's not hard. I just need to understand the other requirements, which I don't right now, but we can certainly look at that.
I think many of those are pointed out, and I know the planning would be more than happy. I think we're looking for, it's such an iconic building that the sign, which is right there on, as you walk past, I think we're looking, at least I know I'm looking for something that has a little bit of imagination and that really draws you. The sign itself has to have a distinctive, iconic quality in a way too. And I think that if they have a chance to show you some of the examples that are in here, and some of the distinctive ways that they use dimension and different kinds of materials on the sign, I think that might give you a better sense.
And just for clarity, can we also continue towards what is our standard brand?
Absolutely.
Because that's what I don't quite understand.
Absolutely. I think it's just a matter of materials and dimensionality and a little bit of creativity in the shapes and of the sign.
So you can see two different forces. One, the library wants people that walk into any Columbus Metropolitan Library to know
Understand it.
this is a Columbus Metropolitan Library. It looked,
Right.
This looked similar to the other branch I went to.
Right.
We should be able to, though, to marry both of those concepts.
Right.
Something that makes it kind of unique and.
Yeah,
to
and
use it.
I'm sure Jenny can help. I'm just not, I don't know what that is right now. So we
Right.
can certainly look at that.
And I think with the library, that's the only real sign that we're talking about. All these other issues are our own problems on our own parking garage. So.
Yeah, you don't have to decide those tonight either. I just thought while we were all here, but no, I'm just kidding. So I think Jenny has captured so why don't we review those, Jenny, and see if that's where you want to go.
So for the ground sign, and I was typing while you were all having a little more conversation, so if I didn't capture this accurately, then we can add to it. So number 3 then would be increasing the height of the stone base and incorporating additional relief and creativity for the ground sign for the library. Then the 4th one would be modifying that North Street projecting sign to match the design and the scale of the projecting sign on Franklin Street. Then we would add the Dublin branch text to the internal sign graphics. And then the 6th one would be significantly reduce the stairwell numbers, that makes no sense, to address pedestrian wayfinding. My only concern with eliminating altogether would be if you're in the stairwell, you need to know what level you're on. But it wouldn't have, to your point, it doesn't have to be potentially as low. Right, okay. I just want to make sure we're not eliminating that possibility, I guess.
I mean, it'll be orange or red or green, whatever.
Sure.
I just think that subtlety can usually be more powerful than the obvious. Even if you had like a pinstriped square that was in a color, You know, and you saw that from the outside, and it wouldn't be as overwhelming as those giant numbers. What's council's preference? Do we want to try to finalize this now with this list, or would you like to have them address this and bring it back to us in another?
I think bring it back. I mean, number one still says the stairway numbers to 6 feet, and then the bottom one says we reduce. I think we can see. I don't know how pressing is it?
We've got time.
We've got time, yeah.
We've got time. I think we. Did you switch slides on me?
I just erased the number one because I don't need number one. So I was making sure you're paying attention.
So significant. I just want to clarify. We had talked about removing the numbers from the stairwell, but we are still talking about we got to have some kind of
wayfinding. People know what level they're on.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
Something more clever.
So
let's just bring it back. Let's not hurry through it.
I just want to make sure this is right though before we go chasing.
Yeah. Any other?
Well, and then what do you call those the big giant word parking?
Yeah, park.
I mean, that's one of the brilliant things of like the wheelchair symbol. You know exactly what it is. You know an H is a hospital. You know a P is parking. You don't have to say the rest of it.
Right,
it communicates on its own. I do
right.
like
So
the
I'm
word.
thinking we would then just have the same sign that's proposed on Franklin Street be then located on North Street. So they would be the same.
How tall is that one? How big is that?
It's got the dimensions of, well, you can't zoom out.
31.5 square feet, I believe.
And what's allowed in the historic district?
It's based on the historic transition, so. Yeah, 8 square, well, no, that's a ground sign, 8 square feet. I don't have that in front of me. We can bring that back next
Yeah.
time. I mean, again, it is, I mean, to your point, it is larger than what is permitted per code. But again, we're dealing with a larger structure than a traditional historic building. But I mean, to be reduced to this would be more in scale with
Right.
the
So, I mean, for me, it's a matter of really understanding these proportions and knowing what is allowed and what we're giving more of in the way of wavering it, I guess. And then
we can bring back a couple options to that.
Great.
Sort of just the P option and it's that. So we'll come back with that.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
One other thing I was thinking about, the book return is inside.
Correct.
Is that, how does somebody know that?
You would have to enter into the garage and see that there's no external signage for that, because we don't want people coming in the out, because you're driving, you enter North Street or Franklin Street and then go through the book drop and come out on Rockcrest.
But you've just explained a wayfinding, which I don't.
It's internal to the garage.
So no matter which entrance I go in?
Yes,
there'll be
sign.
wayfinding inside the
Yes.
garage that will help us find our way through
Find
there.
the book drop. Similar to an entrance or an exit sign, there's signs that show you which way to go.
by the way, I think the bicycle is cool. I mean, that's the kind of unusual little, you don't notice it's not a sign, but you know that's where you park your bike. So I guess I would like to see less of this commercial look and something that is more subtle, more context appropriate, more what we're looking for when it comes to a little bit
Can we hang a
unique.
car on the side of the?
Yeah, we can do that, yeah. An antique car, yes.
I like that.
Yes.
You could eliminate all that signage by putting like the P in the inside the tire of the
tire of a
bicycle
car,
that's hanging
yeah.
on the wall. We could make it cleaner and cooler.
Okay, Dana, you have what you think you need?
We're crystal clear, Mayor.
Good. That's always my goal, Dana. We got there.
We just need a motion to table.
I make a motion, we table the master sign plan until it is brought back.
Second.
Ann?
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Crooms?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Sorry, Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Is that it?
Did you vote?
Staff comments, Dana?
Yes, just a couple items, thank you. In your council packet info-only items, there was a memo regarding the follow-up to the development plan, site plan for River Crossing Park, East Plaza Phase 1. I just wanted to confirm, as that memo requests, we'll be back on June. We were trying to shoot for this meeting, but we had a few things we needed to polish up. We'll be back on June 25th to bring back to you that list of items that you had highlighted that you wanted to know more about. So we will come back, bring those items back to you, brief you on that, and get any further guidance you have. If there's something in that list that's missing, let me know. That
I would just add it says it says provide additional details regarding the design and provide real stone cut on 14-foot east-facing plaza wall. Can you just add to that what's going to be on the 10-foot wall as well?
Yes, we can do that.
Item C, they're under 2.
Okay. Got it.
And maybe I missed it, I don't know, we talked a fair bit about the need to have flower beds and some of that type of stuff, and I don't think I saw that when I was reading through there as clear as maybe we discussed it in that meeting.
Okay.
Right, and last thing on the public engagement, I know there's supposed to be one July something.
11?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, so we were asking about if the July 11th date was okay with council. That's a tentative, that's just tentative we've set on the schedule.
Okay, that's fine.
That works.
I want to see it on the website on events, and then, oh, shoot. I'll think of it. I'll think of it, yeah.
So June 25th, we'll bring this information back to you, validate. July 11th, we'll shoot for the engagement piece, and we'll start getting that word out if you're okay with that. And then August 13th, we'll be back before council with all the follow-up as a result and moving forward. And then the next item is council work sessions. So there's one a week from tonight. We were going to do parking study results, but we are going to push that back till after your break. So I'm recommending that we do, as a result of your retreat, we do the land acquisition discussion and policy review that we had talked about as part of retreat. I think that's a better time frame to do that. So we're going to like to pursue that on Monday. And then Wednesday would be a follow-up to your last work session that you had in May on the historic Dublin items, the Bridge Street District items, and we'll bring items back for guidance relative to that. So that, just giving you a verbal, we'll get the agendas and everything out by the end of the week, if that's okay.
The thing that I forgot on the, sorry about that, it's a long night. On the Riverside Park, we talked about getting some input from people maybe through the Dublin Rec Center, maybe putting up some of the pictures and utilizing that message board to just ask the question, you have any thoughts about this, that we could do that so easily?
Yeah, we did that previously as part of this, so we'll do that again.
Yeah, and maybe even if there's a way that we can do anything like that over in the Bridge Street area in one of those green spaces. I mean, they're the ones that are going to use the park so much. It'd be nice to get their input too. The web survey, or the little question on our city website, is simply your name, and there's no questions. There's no specific questions that people could answer, and that's another possibility too.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Dana?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Committee reports. P&Z, Jane.
We spent a little bit of time on Block D, and that went through. Block D is Bridge Street's 4 blocks, 5 buildings on 4 blocks. I know that you all went through the site plan. I brought up to the commission that coming into this late, one of the things that I noticed about the site plan, which I would like to bring to council's attention when we look at site plans, is that one of the things that's happening in Bridge Park, I believe, is that we are not looking at block configuration in ways that makes it more efficient to be able to offer services of loading, unloading, and that sort of thing. We are not providing any streets and alleys, so we are forcing most of our servicing to happen on our neighborhood streets and our circulator streets. So I'm just bringing this to your attention because I found it difficult as I looked at these buildings to try to figure out how to make it pedestrian friendly and not bring so much service, loading and traffic to these buildings. We're just limiting ourselves when we look at these site plans. So as we go forward, I would ask you to really take a look at what the Bridge Street guidelines are on the arrangement in lots and blocks. Then we talked about the DCAP, the Metro Blazer area, and we had residents there, and they were comfortable with moving forward. Commission did say they thought it was essential, and I know there'll be notes in planning and zoning's meetings, that landscaping of both Franz Road and buffering by neighborhoods, by residences, is really important. And also there was quite a bit of discussion about the use of open space inside the corporate area plan, and how we can make that really attractive, not just maybe not just a greenway, but a really attractive public realm space. And I think we need to look at that with a critical eye, and I know the commission was looking at that way. That's about it.
Thank you, Jane. Admin, Mike. Chris.
You all received a packet from me this evening, and has your materials for our review session in the next couple weeks, and look forward to a great time there. Happy reading.
Community Development, John.
Nothing, thank you.
Finance, Mike.
We have a finance committee meeting scheduled next week at 6 o'clock. I'm sorry, in 2 weeks on the 25th, prior to our regular council meeting. It will be at 6 p.m. and I think we're doing cost of services study, and drill down on that. That's all.
Thanks, Mike. Public Services, Christina.
Nothing right now, except, Jane, you have an email in your inbox from me.
Okie dokie. CODA, Kathy. Or Central Ohio Transit Authority, Kathy.
I don't have anything new to report.
Dublin Community Foundation, Chris.
Library presented at the last meeting of some of their fundraising goals, and I think that the Community Foundation is going to attempt to assist with that fundraising process, so they're well underway.
Dublin Friendship Association, Christina.
We met on the 22nd of May, and thanks to Matt for coming and presenting and talking a little bit about the Riverside Crossing Park. There were lots of good questions from the group, and so it was a good discussion. And Wolf actually asked about the potential arena to go down there, so we had a small discussion around that as well. But it was really about having events and programming in that park space, and what could that look like? What's the possibility for it? Could there be, alcohol or just family events, or how many people could it hold? Is there going to be a shelter structure? Those kinds of questions. So it was a good conversation. Nancy and I will continue to work with the Greater Columbus Sister Cities International. We had them come and to a day at the memorial tournament at the Villa, which was really nice. I'm not sure how many of you got an opportunity to meet them and talk with them, but they're really, really interested in partnering with us on some potential interactions with India. That's really their next focus. They already have a sister city with India, so it'd be a good opportunity for us to figure out what those interactions could look like. So that's sort of exciting. There was a request for this summer for homestay request. So there's 20 Japanese students that are going to be visiting Dublin, excuse me, August 19th through 24th. I'm not sure if they've gotten all those spots yet, but for anyone who might be interested in having an exchange student for that period of time, please reach out to John Rockelman or Kaufman or Scioto High Schools, and they can get you in touch with the right people for that as well. That's about all I have for that.
Thank you. Morpsey, Chris.
We had executive meeting last week, and we are going to be talking about some land strategies upcoming, and will be interesting to look at what the impact of Hyperloop might have on that. And then we have our committee of the whole meeting this coming Thursday, I believe. That's all.
Logan Union Champaign County Regional Planning Commissioning, Kathy.
Nothing to report.
How about the US 33 Innovation Corridor Group?
We meet Friday.
All right. Let us know. Dublin Arts Council, John.
Hey, we started Sunday on the Scioto yesterday, and we had a really good guy help us with bands that had actually has managed or directed other large groups of famous bands and Aerosmith and all these other bands. And I think he really helped us pick out some great bands this year. So you're going to have a good chance to see some really good music if you can make it over there at 7 o'clock on Sunday evening. Had a big crowd, even though it was going to be rainy, and it didn't scare away the crowd, and we didn't get any rain. So keep that in mind for Sunday night entertainment.
Thank you, John. Dublin Board of Education, Christina.
Oh, our meeting was canceled. Are we rescheduling that, Dana?
We will. I haven't had a chance to give the superintendent an A yet.
All right, let us know. Washington Township, I had a really nice time with Eric Richter at the Villa over the course of the tournament. He has a lot of very fresh ideas that he wants to run past us that I think will be a very good direction to go in, so Dana and I are going to be meeting with him. Roundtable. Jane?
I had the opportunity to attend the first Aging in Place conference that we had with the group, and we had a good over 50 people, and amazing, amazing comments came out of that. Some so thoughtful that we had probably not even considered. So I think that we're going to hear some really interesting and probably unique thoughts from people that maybe even the professionals hadn't thought of. So I think that'll really be good.
Are we going to get a report?
I don't know. Are we going to get a report?
Well, we'll get it. They'll bring it through the Public Services Committee.
Yeah.
We'll discuss and figure out, and then we're going to be bringing some things to council. So
Yeah.
you'll see more. You definitely will see more of that.
One of the things that's most important to bring to you is that most of them said that they were so appreciative of the opportunity to talk about the things that are so important to them. So it was quite touching. The memorial tournament was great. I'll just say that after seeing the banner up there on the AC Marriott, I liked it. I thought it was perfect for that particular event, and I didn't think it was unobtrusive. And I think that its direction where you come up 33 or Riverside Drive was just good. So that's my thought on that. The leaderboard breakfast, I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed Christopher Zimmerman, and I had an opportunity to have lunch with him, so I got a little insight and some thoughts about Bridge Street, and I enjoyed that. So, and I also thought it was wonderful the way, being the first time I'd had an opportunity to be in the hospitality suite and meeting so many of the people, I would like the opportunity to learn more who's coming through, to know better how we can be the best host possible while we're spending our time there. I thought it was nice that we had some dedicated time for the council generals and for the Marysville City Council, but maybe next year, as an improvement to that, it would be nice to be able to know who's coming and when they might be coming so that we can even be better hosts. So, and Monterey Park was a perfect place for lunch for Memorial Day events, and I thought that was very nice. And John, you did a very nice job speaking. So that's it.
Thank you, Jane. Kathy?
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that and congratulate the staff and the city and the tournament staff. It's always so impressive to see how all of that works so very well, and I know that is certainly not an easy feat, so I congratulate everybody and thank you on that. I also wanted to thank staff for getting the panhandling signs up. I will say my only comment perhaps on that is sometimes the visibility, sometimes they're pretty high up and kind of hard to see. I was sitting near one, unfortunately, yesterday when, right near it, when somebody pulled up and gave a panhandler money right next to the sign. So, but I think maybe even thinking about, just the proximity of those and continue to do that work. But I think the message, and I've had people comment to me that happy to see that. So I appreciate that and thank the staff on that. And then I had the honor, along with John and Greg, to be at the library event when they put the highest beam in place. So I think the great news is that all of that is moving along so well. I understand from talking to some of the folks there that we should see it all enclosed by fall, so they can do the work. So continuing to be on schedule. So that was a great event, and I think it's going to be a wonderful facility. That's it.
Thank you, Kathy. John?
Hey, just want to thank you all for coming out on the Memorial Day. It was a hot and muggy day, but you went out and braved it. And I want to thank Mr. Sullivan for really doing a great job with the tournament this year. I didn't get one complaint in my ward for all that activity, and it was very professionally done. The knockdown started, immediately, and they started cleaning the place up. They did a really great job. So kudos to the Memorial staff for organizing and creating a great event for our city. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Mike?
I'll just echo the comments on the tournament. It was the villa was great. Got a chance to sit with the consul general from Ireland early on in the suite, and that's a nice way to meet people. So have a one-on-one. So I actually had an opportunity to introduce him to a lot of our guests and other people, and they were all thrilled to actually see the consulate general from Ireland. So that was pretty neat. So, and thanks to staff for all the hard work on that. I know we've got some hard work coming up here the 4th of July. We're probably all getting beat up for access, so good luck with that. That's all I have.
Christina?
Thanks. Just a couple things. I want to piggyback off of Kathy's comment on the panhandling signs. I think that the sandwich folding board is great. It's the right size. I will say that the man who tends to stand at that particular corner literally took the sign and threw it behind the Burger King sign. My husband and I later went back and set the sign back up. We've done that twice now. So I showed Michelle and Dana a picture of how OSU on campus, they have the same type of signs. They hang like a sandbag from the middle, so you can't pick it up and lift it and kick it around. So I definitely recommend that we leverage that, so he can't just toss it aside. And I do echo that the other sign that's on the other corner is too small, too high. So I would like to take a look at that. But thank you so much for putting them together. I, too, have heard lots of people echo big thank yous on at least working to try to mitigate the issue. So for the memorial service, I parked kind of far away, and I was walking in, and I happened to be at the light with this gentleman standing there, and he was asking me where I was going, and I told him, and he said, oh, I come to this cemetery every year to pay my respects. And I asked him where he was from, and he lives in Upper Arlington. And he said that Dublin does the nicest job at recognizing our veterans, and he himself as a veteran always makes the trip to come to Dublin to come to our veteran events. I just wanted to let staff know that. I think we do a phenomenal job, so thank you, and our veterans are very well worth it. Did anyone go to Forfest? I saw you. I didn't see you there. Yeah, that's right. I saw you there too. I thought it was a pretty cool event. I thought it worked out pretty well. I had an opportunity to speak with 3 or 4 business owners, and they were really loving it. So that was fun. So thanks for doing that as well. That's pretty much it. Thanks.
Thank you, Christina. Chris?
Wanted to thank the folks from EPCON. The new Muirfield Ridge did their groundbreaking for them on the 22nd, and that's I won't say it's a really affordable way, but it is a nice way for senior housing to come in relative proximity to the community and provide a product that we don't have readily available. So it's a great use of that piece of property there that is not going to be burdensome to the schools or things of that nature. So. Also got to participate in the graduation of the Eli Penny Space Academy. So I want to congratulate those graduates because they're actually sending a project about jellyfish into outer space, and it's really going up in a rocket. So that's a huge accomplishment for middle or elementary school kids. I mean, how wonderful is that? So I want to celebrate that with them. And John, you did do a great job on Memorial Day. Thank you for that, and for all the staff that came out on the holiday to do that. It was particularly a good time with the consul generals, both of Ireland and from Japan and Detroit, and they seem to be very appreciative of their time here. And I would echo the thoughts about the panhandling signs, and am grateful that we were able to mobilize that and take a quick peek at it and cross the finish line strong, because I think we're really close and appreciate those efforts. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Chris. Just a couple of quick comments, I guess. Congratulations to Dan and Nicholas and all the guys up there at the tournament. They just do an unbelievable job, and that is only second to the job that our staff does. And Chief, your guys and officers, the men and women in blue that are out there protecting us. When you think about all the pedestrians running across the middle of a road at random times, the control that you guys maintain over the situation, and that our staff and what they do, you basically bring hundreds of thousands of people into a neighborhood, and within a matter of hours, you never even noticed they were there. It's really an absolutely amazing job that you do. I did enjoy the Consul General's Brian O'Brien when he said he went back to the other Dublin, which was kind of fun to hear. So
his less favorite Dublin.
His less favorite Dublin, no question about that. And on a more substantive note, I would just recommend that everybody, and I know Kathy brought it up, look at Faye's memo in our, whatever they call that other packet that we get, information-only stuff about this centralized collection and what it's doing. And I really think that we should, maybe, Dana, when you get an opportunity to sort through all of the other 12 balls that you're juggling, I think that those issues, maybe not just what the state of affairs is now, but what we're facing, is something that we should do maybe at a work session and really roll up our sleeves. And quite frankly, we have to take the gloves off and fight as hard as we possibly can, because it isn't just where we are now. It is the trend that we could be going in the future. And I know that a lot of people, a lot smarter than me certainly, and than us, have been working on this. We need to make sure that we as a body are doing as much heavy lifting on that issue as we possibly can in every arena, because that is an issue that could fundamentally change this community and the way that we fund the things that we fund. And we all know that when you have the resources to do the things we do, they're not really problems. They're more inconveniences that we deal with. And if that dries up, we're in a world of hurt. So I think Faye's memo was very informative as to what's happening and maybe what we can expect in the future. So that's that. Anybody else have anything else? We will be adjourned.